Hello, everyone. Hi, Bill. So happy to
Hey,
be here
Nicholas.
with you today for this session on unleashing the economic value of your data ethically and at scale. So it's a great topic. Maybe we can start with a few intros.
Sure.
I don't know if everyone knows Bill. I can introduce him quickly. He's really I would say a veteran from the data analytics space. Some calling the dean of big data, and has been pioneering a lot of things around big data, and most specifically the economical part. How to drive value, how to generate impact, and so on. Has been writing probably 4 books on the topic.
Yep.
I really recommend them, and they're very practical. So that's what's interesting in them, because you find a lot of things that can be applied, and also doing an MBA, big data MBA course at the university. So that's and welcome, Bill.
Nicholas, thank you for having me. And thanks for the nice introduction. Thank you.
And yeah, thanks for joining. And so very quickly, I'm Nicolas Averseng. I'm the founder and CEO of YOOI. I have been working on the Dynamic space for probably more than 15 years now. I had the chance to work on with several industries, and always, kind of an obsession of how do we build things that actually generate value, and not and not just doing technology for the sake of technology. So maybe we can go, and yeah, everyone said please ask questions. We'll see them pop up in the session, and I'll be happy to bring them to Bill or myself. And we want that to be really interactive, and yeah. So bring your questions. So let's go. The floor is yours, Bill.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Nicholas. And what I find where organizations really struggle with their data and analytics strategy is they think about data and analytics as the endpoint, not a means to an end. That you really organizations don't really need a data and analytics strategy as much as they need a business strategy that incorporates data and analytics. And the starting point for that conversation isn't around data, isn't around analytics, but it's around understanding where and how the organization actually creates value and how it defines its value creation effectiveness. So it starts with that business initiative. What is the organization trying to do? What is important to the organization? And what is it that is at the very core or foundation of how they create value? So this business initiative is critical because we want to understand what it is we create value, what are our objectives, what are the desired outcomes, what are the KPIs and metrics against which you're going to measure success, and also understanding the costs associated with failure as well. And there's very valid reasons for understand all those aspects, because what we want to do is when we get down to the next levels, we want to start working across a very diverse set of internal and external stakeholders who are impacted by that business initiative to understand, what are their objectives? What are their desired outcomes? What are the KPIs and metrics against which you're going to measure success? And so at the end of this process, in the middle part, we come up with all these KPIs, these metrics, and the decisions the stakeholders are making that we cluster into use cases. So a use case is basically a cluster of decisions and desired outcomes around a KPI or a set of KPIs. And when we get to that point of use cases, now I have enough meat where I can define, yes, thank you, where I can actually bring together the data and data science teams and the business teams around how do we actually create value, right? Optimizing use cases, making better decisions is quantifiable. I can quantify the value of improving my customer targeting. I can quantify the value of improving and reducing unplanned operational downtime. So we want to make sure we start the conversation by understanding how we create value, how we measure that value, what are the desired outcomes, who are the stakeholders who are involved in that, and what are the use cases? Identify, validate value, and prioritize those use cases around which we're going to create or realize value. Any comments?
Awesome. And yeah, I really like the title, at the beginning, thinking about being value driven, not. Oh, did I lose you?
I'm here.
Okay, sorry. No. So I was saying, yeah, I really like the title about being data, not data driven, sorry, and value
Right.
driven, because that's something that has been very, I would say, mistaken or often taken in the wrong direction, basically, in saying, okay, let's build data and then value will come, and that notion of reversing the thinking is really something that has been also foundational for me, and something like repeating and repeating and repeating.
Yeah, I had a good friend who told me that the challenge that organizations are having is, how do you translate math models into economic models? That is, how do you take AI and ML models and turn them into economic or value creation models? And we need more professionals who are trained to understand that mapping. What's interesting, Nicholas, is that what I found as my career has evolved, or especially over the past 5 to 7 years, is I'm less and less infatuated with technology and more infatuated with both design thinking and economics, right? Design thinking about how do I identify those sources of customer or stakeholder value creation. And economics, of course, is about how do I create and distribute value or wealth.
Yeah, totally. I think we meet there.
Yeah, let me talk about this really quick. So the reason why this process of identifying the KPIs and metrics against which you're going to measure success across a broad range, a diverse range of internal and external stakeholders is critical, because the way that AI works, AI is actually, it's a really simple concept. All it's going to try to do is optimize its decisions and actions within the environment it works based on the AI utility function, which are the variables and metrics against which it's trying to optimize. So AI, I like to say, it's like playing the kids' game of hotter and colder, right? Where you're trying to, getting hotter, getting colder. The only difference is that the prize is constantly moving. So you're constantly having to change. The AI utility function and the weights of the variables and metrics inside of that determine the kind of decisions that the AI model is going to take. And so having a very robust set of these KPIs and metrics is critical, because if you don't have a robust set, you're going to end up with confirmation bias and some potentially disastrous unintended consequences. If you go to the next slide really quick here, Nicholas, this is when I work with customers, my stress is that don't focus just on the financial metrics, right? If you're a social media company and you're only focused on optimizing clicks, likes, and shares, you will get confirmation bias. What you need to do is you need to broaden your perspective. Look at operational, customer, employee, partner, ecosystem, society, environmental, all these other variables you need to consider. And as you're looking across all these different variables, or you're going to populate your AI utility function, make sure you're identifying leading indicators, not lagging indicators, right? Things like net present value and internal rate of return, those are all, for the most part, lagging indicators. And optimizing lagging indicators is really hard and almost fruitless. Instead, I want to get down to the leading indicators, right? If I'm going to try to optimize customer retention, by the time they've left, it's too late. So I want to find all those leading indicators: customer satisfaction, likelihood to recommend, frequency of visit, monetary visits, right? Recency of visit. There's a whole bunch of variables and metrics around this value circle here that I'm going to use to try to understand which of these are leading indicators to a customer who's not satisfied with their experience with my company.
And I really like that, because the fact that sometimes it's a real struggle to try to express everything in terms of financial impact. So we know that you could say that in the end, for organization, generating economical value is critical, but looking at those other dimensions, including environmental value or societal value, are really important, because they have an impact, and it's also a better way to convey value on the day-to-day or at the different place within the organization. One question though is you mentioned explicitly AI here, and I would tend to say that it's broader than that. It's whatever you do with data, you have the same kind also of maybe not the same scale of what I do influence the world, and then it influence my data and so on. But how is it different with AI for you versus why don't you just say data, or data and analytics basically?
So the reason why I bring it back to AI is because ultimately there's at some point in time where we're going to put the data into action. Right?
Yeah.
Economics is about the application of assets to create value. Right? Economics is a value in use methodology. So ultimately, having data is of no value. In fact, having data is a cost. It's only when you apply it to drive desired outcomes that it actually creates value. And so what we want to make sure we do is we're thinking, begin with an end in mind. We're trying to think about what is the endpoint we're trying to drive? What is the desired outcome? What does good look like? So I make certain that I've thought holistically about these variables and metrics, the leading indicators more than the lagging indicators, so I can make certain that I'm driving my AI, my ML, all my analytics, and using the data in the right way to drive those outcomes. Which, by the way, was interesting is you're going to soon learn that not all data elements are of equal value. Right? Not all data sources are of equal value, and not all data elements in your point of sale system, for example, there's some data elements in there that are critically valuable, and there's some that probably have little if no value. And so as organizations go through a data management, data governance process, understanding where to focus their investment on data governance and data management becomes critical. If you peanut butter across all your data sets, well, you're going to end up with a very weak return on your investment. But if you can be laser focused, make precision decisions regarding what data sets and what data elements do I really make sure that are fully, high quality, low granularity, low latency, all that kind of stuff, I become very focused on the decisions I'm making around my data as an asset that I'm going to derive value from how I use it.
No, I get that. So you mean, yeah, you really mean AI, but it could be any kind of analytics. It doesn't mean to have it doesn't has to be advanced machine learning and so on, but it has to start from what you want to achieve and how you want to actually, or you're going to use it. I mean, it's not just the data; it's the usage of the data, in a
I mean,
sense.
let's be real honest. Regression is probably still the most popular analytic tool out there.
Yeah.
And regression works really well. Understanding the variables and metrics around what you're going to use regression to predict what's going to happen becomes critical. We can get very lulled into 2 or 3 variables when in reality the world's a little more complex. And so we want to make certain that we are thinking more holistically, even for things like regression models.
Okay. No, that's okay.
Not the ding regression model. I think regression models are great. Well overlooked.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure for everyone that AI is not necessarily that all of that is not only applicable when you do very advanced kind of analytics and so on. It starts with everything you want to do to let's say, yeah, bridge the gap from your data and value basically, and all the analytics you put there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we move to use cases now, which is.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and build this out? Because what this really highlights is that when we focus on a use case approach, that we can invoke this data economic multiplier effect, which is the same data set can be used if it's constructed and shareable. If I made the data set easily shareable, that same data set can be used across an unlimited number of use cases at zero marginal cost. I don't have to create a whole nother instance of my data for my second use case, for my third use case, for my fourth use case, that it has this very unique aspect that it never depletes, never wears out, and it can be reused across an unlimited number of use cases at zero marginal cost. So this data economic multiplier effect is very powerful. And we've not seen an asset that behaves like this, right? So when we start this conversation and start thinking about data as an economic asset, right? Value in use asset, not an accounting, not a finance, but a value in use. And then you apply the data economic multiplier effect, you have a very game-changing perspective on why we're going to take a use case by use case approach, because we can apply that, reuse it simply. We can also employ the economies of learning, because everything we learned from the earlier use cases can be applied to the later ones. So we start this economic multiplier effect kicking in. And also each use case from a business perspective has a positive ROI. We're like printing money as we build out the organizations, incrementally build out the data and analytics capabilities of the organization. I mean, what's not to like about this, except the fact that, this kills big bang approach. I got to spend $10 million to build a data lake and then load all my data in it and then hope I get value from it. Well, hope's not a very good strategy unless you're in the cosmetics industry. So this is a very pragmatic approach for how you build out your data and analytics capabilities, use case by use case, where each use case literally is paying for itself.
Yeah, that's and maybe I had one question around that is and maybe that relates to the previous slide you have is here you take cases where you impact you increase you improve metrics like retention and so on. And what about case where value is what I call an insurance kind of value, like avoiding being fined or being compliant with stuff, because it's also something where it's kind of I call that insurance usually.
It's risk management. And the reason why you buy insurance is that you have figured out, there's an associated value to it. Yeah. Even risk mitigation has value, right? It may be the negative of it, if you don't want to have this, but understanding what your level of exposure is, right, would help you figure out what level of insurance you need to have to offset that.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So we have a great question from Adam.
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Here. And basically ask value. Value is a job of executive. Data is a job from someone else. And I think that relates to a question I had a lot lately. Is how to avoid a kind of customer supplier relationship between the business and the data teams, if I understand it well, and not putting the data teams as a pure, just build that because I ask, and force them into making sure they get through that value creation discussion and so on.
Adam, I think you've raised a really good point here, and that we in the technology side have trained our executives to think that we are only data, and that when we show up, we're only going to talk data. And only because we never talk value to them. And this is a shift in what our relationship is to the business. We are co-creators of value with them, that they can't create value with data and analytics without our involvement. And we cannot determine the value of our data and analytics in isolation of the business. And so you start seeing this natural linkage point where you're bringing together the business stakeholders who not only can help define how value is created, but are also going to be very important in actually deploying the data and analytics we develop to drive value, and then helping to guide us as far as, well, what are we trying to build? Because we can build all kinds of crazy, analytic models, but if they don't actually answer or drive the decisions and power the decisions that our stakeholders are trying to make, then why bother? So you almost create this deadly embrace around value creation.
Yeah.
And it might take a while to get them there because they've never heard you talk like this before. But the reason why, like I said earlier, that I find myself really driven towards an economics conversation, because at the end of the day, organizations are all about creating value. Whether you're a nonprofit or not, everybody's trying to create value. And that gives us a common language around which we can have conversation, and we can drive that linkage between the business and the data and analytics organization.
Yeah, clear. And what I've seen a lot is that when people who do the implementation part don't really understand the goal, usually they make there is a tons of unsaid things, and basically they deliver poorly whatever happens. It's not that poor people, it's right. Just that if you don't know what is the real goal and what people are going to do with it, you're going to do a lot of things that at the end it's like when you're building a tunnel and at the end it's you miss the mark.
What I love about the methodology that we're going to talk about in a bit here, Nicholas, is I love the fact we talk about what does good look like? What are your desired outcomes, right? And I also like the conversation around what are the ramifications of failure? What happens if we fail? What are the KPIs and metrics ripple out of that? And when you start bringing people around that more holistic view of what they're trying to achieve, then you create that bond where the data science team doesn't show up, gather requirements, and to go back behind some darkened room for 2 months and build something. It is a constant engagement process of making sure that we are on the right path, that we are continuously learning and adapting as we drive towards those desired outcomes.
Yeah. So let's move here. Yeah, and this art of thinking.
Let's don't spend a lot of time here, because I think what Nicholas is going to show. So people who follow me know that I have this methodology. I teach this at the university. In fact, I'm teaching a class this semester at Iowa State, taking my students step by step through this process where we define where value is created, we bring the stakeholders in, we build the business entities around, we're going to build analytics. And you know this process very well. And I think, Nicholas, what you and your company has done, you've actually scaled this. You've institutionalized this in software that I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, the point is, and that's why I was really excited by doing this this webinar with you, is that basically we've built YOOI to support that kind of thinking and to make sure that we start from the business value and we animate all of it. And so the goal here is today to show you that art of thinking like a data scientist methodology, but live on YOOI, because it's really a way to operationalize that and scale that, and not only as a one-time exercise, but something that will be living with you and with your how you define your strategy, but also how you make that delivery. So a quick intro of what YOOI is, and then we'll move to the live demo and maybe come back to a few things and wrapping up afterwards with Bill. So YOOI is it's a SaaS platform. So it's built for organizations who have a CDO and they really want to make sure that they drive their strategic expectation from data analytics. So it's been built to answer those difficult questions that goes through the whole life cycle of data analytics investments, like how do you identify initiatives, how do you qualify them, how you do that in a consistent way, and how you end up prioritizing your work, how you deliver efficiently, and to use the point we just discussed, keeping alignment amongst all the different stakeholders, and how do you not forget to track risks, including ethical risk or cost and so on the long way. So basically, YOOI enables a collaborative way across the organization to manage data analytics investments, both assets and initiatives, as what we call a value-driven data analytics portfolio. So what do we mean by that? Is the first thing is really to make that kind of connection, and sometimes we call that the business lineage, which is very different from the technical lineage you find in your catalogs and so on, is connecting the strategic business priorities of the organization with initiatives and then with assets. So being able to know how you prioritize the work on the data part with what you want to achieve from the business and building that lineage. So that's really important to build that consolidated portfolio. The second dimension is really to be able to have that value-driven governance of the whole portfolio. So being able to have those three dimensions of value, risk, and costs on all the dimensions. So we can't talk about value if we don't care about the risk, and obviously if we don't control the costs that are attached to that. And we also need to manage things on the full life cycle. So there is a lot of talks currently around managing data as a product and managing data initiatives and data products or data infused products. So you really need to have that product management mindset. So it means from how you manage demands and incoming IDs to prioritizing them. So what we call the define phase. Then how you ensure during the delivery that you keep alignment, keep track of all of that, and ultimately how you monitor value over time. And that part is really important for me, that continuum. It's where we built from the thinking like a data scientist methodology. It's not just how you frame things, but then you need to be able to monitor that to make further decisions. What do you stop? Where do you reinvest? And so on. And the last part, and we'll see that also afterwards, is the reusing. It's really important, because if you want to maximize value, you need to be able to reuse, and to do that, you need to understand also how it's been used already, and it's a kind of virtuous loop, all of that. The very last thing is around integration. I won't spend too much time on that today, because but it's really important, to be able to streamline all that, to bridge information that is scattered in a lot of different tools today. from information about assets that are in the catalogs, information about the day-to-day of projects in project management tools, cost information in data platforms, and so on and so on. So just to finish on that, what we call this value-driven data analytics portfolio is really the ability to combine all those dimensions together, and that's how we built YOOI to operationalize things like the thinking like a data scientist methodology.
By the way, that's very cool how you've taken it to the next level. I love how you've extrapolated up to make the methodology even more operational. I think this is great.
So let's walk people through the thinking like a data scientist methodology, but in YOOI now. Let's go to the portal. So basically here we've built like the thinking like a data scientist methodology portal, where you can find an entry point for people who would come and create a new initiative, or like they have a new idea, a new business idea, a new demand, and we'll see the rest of things we could explore. In that case, we took actually the same data from Bill's book, which is the Sheeple use case, and we've identified 3 business initiatives. So as you see, let's take one of them, and here what we've seen is we really took the same steps as the one you have in the methodology. And so here, as a business, we really want to improve the same store sales by 12% over the next 12 months. So it's a typical use case in the retail world. And it really starts with describing that and describing how is that actually going to unlock business value. Like I want to ensure better customer experience. And to your point, then we link that to metrics. How I'm going to measure that. And the good thing here is that, on top of using that on a sheet of paper, is that you're building that library of KPIs you have that you can reuse across different initiatives to build consistency. And of course, afterwards, you will be able to see also, which initiatives I've identified that can support those different target business initiatives. So that's the first step of the methodology. Then obviously we identify the business stakeholders who are going to serve and why we're doing that. Again, that's the same. It's really important because here we easily drive people. We have our different stakeholders. We can reuse them. The third step, and let me know, Bill, if you want to elaborate on that. On the story of why the things matter.
Yeah, well, for example, the stakeholders, as we talked about earlier, having that diverse set of perspectives helps us to make sure we have the right metrics against which we're going to measure success. But in many times, these stakeholders are the same people who are going to be using what we have. So bringing them into the process early, making sure their voice is heard is critical if we expect them actually to use the output of this process to drive better decisions.
Yeah. And so the next step is to identify the business entities, meaning, about which part of our business we need information to be able to deliver, on that initiative. So here, for example, we need information about our customers, we need information about our stores, and that's really important because then we'll detail that. And then ultimately, to end that first part, let's say, of the process, we can identify the decisions that needs to be made and by whom. Again, so we can reuse those stakeholders from here to be able to identify, what kind of decisions they're going to make based on that. So, like improving local events marketing, improving their production planning, staffing, and so on. So that's the kind of thing.
Nicolas, this is really the key linkage point between the data science team and the business is decisions, because ultimately we want to optimize decisions. Now, decisions are very different than questions. Questions are useful in helping to explore what variables and metrics we might want to go after to validate. But eventually, where we're going to drive monetization is around making better decisions.
Yeah. And so the next step to decisions, once we know the decisions that are going to be made and basically who's going to make them, so that's really important to make that link. We can start by identifying use cases and grouping those decisions into different use cases that we want to deliver. So here, for example, we've identified 3 use cases that are going to be required to basically deliver on those decisions. So for example, let's take one, which is increase store traffic by local events. So let's say we're going to do a lot of local events to drive people to the stores. And we see that we had the overview, already on the business value and on some of the information we filled in afterwards. So the first step here to prioritize is re-prioritization. So we link that to the decisions that from before, so which decisions are enabled by that by that use case. And then we can do and that's something we discussed already, Bill, how to do that business value and feasibility work. So
Right.
here we kept it very simple, like you do in your workshops with Post-its, the one you have just behind you.
Yeah.
It's here. And basically putting a score from 0 to 100 for what is business value and feasibility. What we do, and I can show that to you, have that in another demo, is that we can also split that into different questions afterward to drive people into a more precise way to identify. I don't quantify business value, and how do I quantify feasibility or complexity, by asking different question of what do we mean by that quantification. Something that sometimes people do with Excel, having those kind of questions underneath and automating the formula to compute that. Then if I go back here, the good thing is that because I have all my use cases, I can look at them also on the same map as you have, and if I want to do the same Excel positioning here, I can easily also do that kind of a collaborative discussion of ranking them one towards the other, which is something which is good, especially when you're not so mature. You can start having those discussions of ranking your different use cases one across the other one.
Hey, Nicholas, one thing I liked about what you've got here is you show these dependencies between use cases.
Yeah.
Because usually use cases really don't stand alone. They all interact. And understanding, where is the right place to start so that I can activate my other use cases becomes a critical part of this process.
Totally. I mean, I've been in IT so long that ideally everyone says your use case should be autonomous and not no link and so on. And ideally, I agree. The less dependencies you have, the better you are. But in reality, we know it's really hard, and you have that. The other thing where we've seen sometimes dependencies happen is that you have like enablers or things you need to do that might be things some people sometimes you put more initiatives that link to your data platform and so on that have technical outcomes. So that would be another way of doing it.
The other thing about this, before you leave this slide, is the fact that having the stakeholders together, being able to discuss the placement of each one of these items. Why is the value improve new product introductions? Why is that value higher? Or why is it less feasible? Those kinds of conversations help to ensure that you have your eyes wide open when you proceed forward. You understand the dependencies, but you've also now got the collaborative buy-in of everybody in the organization who understands why we're going to pick the one we're going to pick and how we're going to turn this into a use case roadmap. We're going to do this one and this one, and really give people a path forward.
No, that and totally agree. And again, that's, I think, especially important in the early stage when you build your first roadmap. Then again, moving forward, sometimes it's important to drive a more systematic way, of having those questions. I show that here, is that we can have those kinds of things here. Yeah. Here I have that's another demo with more use cases, but
Yeah.
If I take one of them, here we've done the same thing, but to compute those impact and complexity dimensions, then we drive people then through a set of questions, like, what is my business, how do you expect this business value, maybe in terms of financial terms, how do you express synergies, alignment, and so on, and then helping drive, and the same for complexity or cost of implementation. So that would be the next stage, and you can complexify that. There's different frameworks that exist at that point to help step by step increasing the complexity here. After and agree at the very beginning, the discussion will be 90% of the value, because it helps driving things, and then you
The other thing too here, Nicholas, is what you just showed also provides transparency into how we're going to make that prioritization process. It isn't just the loudest voice in the room or the hippo, right? The highest paid person's opinion, right?
Yeah.
We transparency is lacking in a lot of these conversations, and if we can bring transparency into it, so people understand the variables we're going to use to make these decisions, you're going to drive better adoption, because people are going to understand, this is why we picked this. This is, by the way, these are the risks associated with these other use cases, and here's what I need to do in order to mitigate the risk of those use cases as their turn comes up on the roadmap.
Yeah, totally. That's why, and having that consistent way of prioritizing things is really important when you scale, because especially we see that with shared competency center at the data office, where then everyone is complaining that their use case has not been prioritized, and why you do this one and not the other one, and then moving forward, you need more and more complete way and comprehensive way to describe that. I think we have a question from Phil, and seems that why do you use use cases and not just decisions on decisions?
So Phil, you're spot on, by the way. We're going to focus on decisions. What happens is that in this process, you're going to find that a lot of stakeholders are all trying to make similar decisions, but from a different perspective. And when we take those stakeholders and their perspective on decisions and create it into a use case, right? We get a broader set of metrics against which we're going to measure that decision's effectiveness. So that's why we kind of take the decision, like you accurately said, decisions are very actionable. We're going to take decisions, the desired outcomes from all the different stakeholders are impacted by that, and the KPIs and metrics, so we come up with a more holistic sort of a perspective of what a use case is. But ultimately, it is decisions we're trying to improve.
Yeah. No, that's and yeah.
Good question.
Good question. Totally, that's a good precision here. So if we continue the thinking like a data scientist methodology, we've basically build a high-level prioritization. Now we're going to dig into more the details of what it means in terms of data science, in terms of analytics, and so on, by brainstorming. What kind of scores do we need? What kind of prediction we need to make to enable that use case, and then what kind of data do we need to support that, to build those scores? So that's what we do here again. And the value here is that, based on the canvas, we can really have also those predictions that can be reused across use case. So that would be interesting at some point to understand that maybe we have different use cases. So to the point, sometimes we gather things. So we do use cases to cover a set of decisions and outcomes, but we can also have shared scores, so that's the reuse part, which will be important.
Hey, Nicholas, the one thing that I've observed in step 5 is that when this is the heart of feature engineering, where we're going to bring together the different stakeholders, many of whom are on the front lines of the organization, right? The front lines of customer engagement and the front lines of operational execution. Those are the people who have the best insights into which variables and metrics might be better predictors of performance. And so you not only do you bring them in to make sure they feel engaged and ready to use the results, but they have valuable, tribal knowledge, years of intuition that they can bring and say, well, we think these are the most valuable variables to look at. So we bring them directly into the feature engineering process because they do have the kind of insights into what variables and metrics might be better predictors of performance. And obviously, it's up to the data science team to actually figure out which ones do have better predictors of performance.
Yeah, definitely. And so once we have them, we can actually group those variables into the different scores that we want to build. So we take the same variables we described here, we can reuse them, and as you said, rank the likelihood of outcomes from those different scores, meaning which one
Yeah.
should produce the better value. Yeah.
Step 6 is where we're building ML and AI models. We're building math models here. We're taking all those variables and metrics, we're adjusting the weights, we're testing, and we're learning, we're inferring. This is the heart of what the data science team is doing, to build these scores that we're going to actually use to drive and improve outcomes or improve decisions.
Yeah. And let's say the last part is really to link that back to expected outcomes, and mapping the different scores we've identified to the decision it's going to, so the recommendations and then the decision it enables. So it's back to making sure that we have scores that provide recommendation and that enable decision at the end. So that's where we link it all together back to the decisions. And so basically that's what I think we've done, the 8 steps of that, and as you see, I think what the value here is that you have a way to animate that and to ease reuse and consistency across those different things. So I like, even if I like a lot, doing it on paper, sometimes it's hard to really operationalize that and especially to scale that. Because here we see that we can also see things, on their whole lives, not only when they're being framed, but also when they're in development. So then we can have, high level view on the current value assessment, what is the estimated value, where we are, so we can track that over time. We can track the risks that are ongoing at the beginning or during delivery. We could track the progress, maybe connecting to a product management platform and so on. Or even see outcomes. But the other thing is that when you want to understand and optimize your portfolio, you can also have a look from the other dimensions, basically. Like, for example, if we look at the business entities we identified before, I can go here and understand, but what did I do with my customer data, basically? And then you can have that understanding of, okay, I have only one initiative, and this is a kind of business value that we're using based on that. And the same, with my stores. So this one has been more used. So we understand that there is more value contribution from the stores. We can do the same from understanding my data sources. So again, looking at my customer information and really having all that understanding. But also, what would be interesting here is that I know that I have consolidated here some data quality information, and now I can say, but I want to invest on the data quality here because it's it matters to ensure that we minimize the risk or we maximize the value for all those different recommendations that are enabled by that data, basically. And so we can really navigate through that model in all the different dimensions to have that understanding and better assess where we can prioritize things and so on. So it's basically an operationalization of that methodology.
So I'm taking a little note here, because what I like about what you showed me is that you've basically turned my methodology into a knowledge graph.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
You've turned a knowledge graph, which is going to help me to drive the reuse of my data and analytic assets and accelerate use case time to value, because I can reuse these things over and over again. So this is when you it's hard to do this on paper. I mean, it's great to teach it on paper and to drive the concept, but if you really want to scale it and drive sort of the economic value of your data and analytics to the reuse, you need something like this that really allows you to easily find what assets I currently have in place, where they've been used, how do I use them here?
Yeah, and totally, and that's why that notion of not only doing the initial phase, which is framing, and building, but also, and I think that relates to the question of Phil, I'm going to bring it up, is to look at it as a product life cycle. Then how is it going to delivery, and then how do I drive reuse is really important. If I show you on the maybe on the other part here. So what we have, it's another demo. It's slightly different in terms of methodology, but we can, have that view also in terms of delivery now. We have that kind of, we see all your products initiatives as a timeline and how we deliver that. So it's really that other visibility that we bring, on the long term. So I think, yeah, just looking at Phil's question, love discussion about data teams. Yeah, I think, yeah, to your point, Phil, I think that's really the point of what we're talking about here, is that the thinking like a data scientist methodology is a great way to make the link between business value, what you want to achieve, and how you draft your data science project and what you want to deliver. But then what we add on top and what we connect with you is to add that product thinking, because then it's the methodology is just the beginning of how the beginning of the design thinking phase. I think you mentioned that earlier, Bill. And then you need to have that product thinking, because you have in the product, you have a life cycle and you have evolutions, and you need to monitor the AI performance when it's live and so on. So that's really the point to drive that product thinking and not just as projects. I think that's where the main difference is, and that's why we talk about operationalization.
That's a great question and a great
Yeah.
conversation. You're right. We need to transition from project thinking to product thinking, so that we are turning these data and analytic assets into products that we can reuse over and over again.
Yeah, totally. That's critical, because so it's something that has been true for IT for me all the time, but it's critical with AI project, is that you have those phenomenon, of data drift or model drifts, and things are not like staying still. And it's back to your point about the AI loop. You influence the world influences you, and back. And so if you don't have a way to think about it as a product with continuous improvements and adapting to the world and continuously prioritizing that, it's I would say it's dangerous. and so that's that kind of product thinking is really important. And I think, and we're going to talk about that also, is it's important for risk management or governance, how you want
Right.
to make sure you release things in the wild, or you pull the trigger sometimes. So that's really key. I think we can go back to the, see, I look at the time, and we can go back, to the ethics part. We've seen a lot of things around operationalization. I think it was interesting to go back to ethics, because that's raising question about ethics. And
Yeah, let me talk about this. So there's a lot of conversation regarding AI ethics, and we are seeing many AI models that are implemented today are exhibiting biases in their decisions, all kinds of problems in hiring models, and who gets credit, and who gets admitted to colleges, who gets rental apartments. It's just, even in jury selection processes, we're seeing AI model confirmation popping up everywhere. And the problem is, especially as we move down towards a world of AI, that this AI agent can continuously learn and adapt. And this AI agent can continuously learn and adapt, at 1 trillion times faster than a human mind can even comprehend. If we don't find a way to instrument and codify ethics and put that into our AI utility function, the AI models are going to, deviate, find a bias, and auger into the ground at a time. But by the time we realize that the damage has already been done. So these sort of the unintended consequences. So this is my first pass working with my students, trying to figure out, how do we quantify ethics? And of course, as you probably know from what I've been talking about so far, I become more and more of an ethics person. I've actually wrote a blog where I said I think God is an economics major, right? I think he believes that. So I'm more and more believe that a lot of what economics can bring to us is a way to codify and quantify what makes something good ethics. And so this is kind of a first pass at a design template that hopefully will be used in combination with the thinking like a data scientist methodology, where we think about an initiative, in this case, launch a Head Start program to feed all K through 6 students. What's the best case scenario? What's the most likely scenario? What's the worst case scenario? How do we start thinking through ahead of time and ideating all the different consequences, both the good consequences and the bad consequences, and then thinking through the KPIs and metrics that we need to start tracking so we can make certain that we're tracking to make sure that these worst case scenarios we can identify sooner and try to prevent them from taking us down paths that we don't want to go down. So very early stages, and I put this out there. I've got a good number of people who have sort of given me feedback trying to use this thing. I would, if you have a chance, try this in some of your programs. Let me know what works, what doesn't work. And like all my stuff, I make it freely available for people to sort of work with and use and hopefully get value from it.
Well, that's great. I mean, and to the point, I think when I presented the YOOI framework earlier, we have those 3 dimensions of value, risk, and cost. And when we talk about risk, the ethical risk is something that is critical, the same way that and we can factor in environmental risk or and not only cybersecurity risk or financial risk. And so and we have customers already who have integrated those ethical frameworks directly into YOOI to make sure that part of the life cycle and part of that value-driven mindset, you also embed that, because it's critical, and no one wants to leave the at the age of ChatGPT and so on. I had a discussion yesterday with someone reminding them of Tay, Microsoft Tay. I don't know if everyone reminds Tay, like from 2016, where there was a kind of a big miss in terms of making sure you embed the right safeguards in terms of ethical behavior and so on, which is a big change now with those tools. So, but yes, I mean that's really something critical, because if tracking those risk metrics, and I like this framework about looking at those getting metrics to monitor that ethical part is really great. And we didn't include that part yet in the YOOI configuration, but
I think we're still in the flesh this thing out.
I think I'll need to think about it, because I had that a few days back, and it's something that is really interesting, because everyone's looking into the best way to capture that. So sometimes we've done that with questionnaires and having those kind of sometimes metrics, but yeah, that would be a good way.
Yeah.
So if someone has feedback on that, also very
please use it. And just my only request, if you use it, is tell me what's working and what's not working, because we can make it better together.
Awesome. I think we're going to an end. I don't know if there is any more question, but that was an awesome discussion, Bill. Very happy to have you here, and thank you so much for the question, everyone. There was some great questions.
There were. Thank you very much.
Any last word, from Bill?
Yeah. As AI becomes more prevalent in our society, our ability to have an inclusive process for bringing people together to understand the KPIs and metrics against which you're going to measure success versus vis-a-vis their desired outcomes, it can become more and more important. And while it has very much relevance today in things like regression analysis or cluster, whatever your basic machine learning stuff is, as we advance more and more towards a world of AI that's continuously learning and adapting with minimal human intervention, if we don't define these things right, we will have terminators. So, and I'm not a big fan of having terminators as my neighbor. So anyway, that's my last thought. And I hope we continue to work together as as a community, as a group, as a bunch of cohorts. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time and joining today, Bill. That was great, and I hope it was practical and interesting for everyone. We tried to make it, as practical as possible, and let's work together to avoid terminators.
Yeah, no terminators.
Terminators. That would be the word of the end.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a great day, Bill, and have a good day, everyone. And looking forward to your feedback afterwards. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.